Hello everyone, my name is Danny and you are watching my Friday Reads video for October 13th, 2017. Thank you if you are a regular subscriber. Thank you for sticking with me on my irregular posting schedule, and thank you to anyone new who has found this video. As I said, if you're new here, I don't post regularly, so you may want to click subscribe and then click on that little notification bell. It doesn't cost you anything, and then you'll see when I have a new video up if you like what you see. Those of you who've been around here for a while know that I really should not be recording this. I should be studying. So we're going to go through this real quick. I say that every time, but I'm really going to be quick because I haven't eaten. I've got a homework assignment that's due tonight, and this bun is giving me a headache. So I'm going to tell you what I've been reading and get through this. First off, I want to mention my Goodreads challenge. I just happened to notice it as I was taking my notes for today's video that I have read 43 of the 50 books that the goal that I set for myself for this year. So that's pretty good. So I think the past couple of years I've set a goal of 100 books, and 2 years in a row I exceeded that, but last year I did not make my goal. So I think I'm going to stick with 50 books for a while. I'm surprised that I've actually gotten this close to meeting my goal, but there is a strange thing with me. The busier my life gets as far as full-time school and work and things like that, I tend to read more books, probably because it's a stress relief. But when I am like last year, where I was unemployed all of last year and not taking any classes and just, looking for work, for some reason I don't read any books. That's crazy. I've got more time on my hands, but I don't read any books. It's kind of weird. So I've read, since my last Friday Reads video, I've read 4 books. All 4 of them fiction, of course, and all 4 of them, well, I'd say 3 of them are romance and 1 of them is women's fiction. The first one is the Dirty Book Club, which is the only arc that I've read since I last spoke to you guys. It's Dirty Book Club by Lacey Harrison. She is a former writer for MTV Networks, and she also wrote a middle grade series called The Click, which I really feel like I read the first book of that series when when one of my daughters was in middle school, because I used to screen their books when they were that age. But I can't remember, but something about it sounds really familiar. That series gets a lot of hate on Goodreads, let me tell you, because it's very like Mean Girls for the junior high set, and people talk about it promoting bad morals and all that kind of stuff. But this book, which is for adults, of course, it's pretty good. It kind of reads like, I would say it's basic women's fiction. To me, it felt predictable, but sometimes you don't mind a predictable book. You don't mind a book where you know where it's going. I certainly have read my share of predictable books. I think what would have improved it, which I didn't think this at the time, but it occurred to me this morning, is that it's a story of a book club of 4 women who were kind of brought together, not really by choice, to form a book club by 4 other women who were best friends, who had formed this book club back in 1963. So this group is supposed to be like carrying the mantle of the book club. And it's supposed to be a secret book club, kind of like the women's version of the first rule of Fight Club, don't talk about Fight Club. So it's but I think it would have been more interesting to me if the whole story had centered on the women who were truly best friends in 1963 and what they had gone through and how scandalous it was for them to be reading the books that they read. The stories of the modern women didn't really didn't really appeal to me that much. It didn't go into, there were a couple storylines that could have been with the modern women that could have been more interesting, but they didn't go into enough depth for me. So, like I said, it was predictable. It was okay. It's, it's basic women's fiction. And that's The Dirty Book Club by Lacey Harrison. It's the kind of book you could probably hand, as far as if you're familiar with my auntie test, it's the kind of book you can hand to your auntie. There's a little bit of sex in it, but it's like over so quick. It's like, if you want to say open door, closed door, this is kind of like close the door halfway through after they kind of got started. Let's put it that way. Not completely closed door. You're going to see a few things that make you go, but you're not going to see the whole thing. Let's put it that way. The next book I read was Ninja at First Sight by Penny Reed. This is a novella, which is part of, it's listed as 4.25, number 4.25 in the Knitting in the City series. And it is the origin story for book number 5 in the series. I've read several of, not all of the books in the series. There's a couple that I've skipped because there's a couple with these kind of series. I generally am a person with series where I feel like I have to read everything in the series, but I'm getting better with some of these what I call standalone series, where each book could stand alone, but you would get more out of each book if you read all the books. But there's just a couple characters in there that I don't dislike the character, but their romance I'm not that interested in. So I'm not reading those books. But this romance in particular, this one I am interested in, because their main romance in book 5, the characters are already married. And I am really interested in books where characters, in romances where characters are already married, because there are things, that married people go through. But this is not that book. I haven't read that book yet. We're still talking about 4.25 Ninja at First Sight, which technically is a new adult book, which didn't hit me until halfway through. But it didn't scare me away. My subscribers know I don't read new adult because I don't want to. The couple new adult books that I read, I've only read like maybe 3 new adult books, and books. I mean, there are books that technically, this is a book that would be technically called new adult because it is young people in college and it's a romance, but it's not. I think it was written before they were calling things new adult. I've read some books that are classified specifically by the publishers as new adult and did not like them. First off, it's difficult for me to read about kids the age of my own kids having sex, and the new adults that were specifically new adults, they felt like they were being intense just for the sake of being intense, whereas this one had the intensity of, I love this boy. I just can't stay away from him. It's just the intensity that I remember feeling for boys when I was 19 or 20 years old. And I wrote this down a while back, so I honestly don't remember the characters' names. I'm sorry. But the heroine used to be, has led a sheltered existence, but she's breaking away from her parents to go to college. And she meets a guy at college, and at first they butt heads, but then they can't seem to stay away from each other. So there's just that intensity, and it's like an intellectual intensity, because in the beginning of the book, when they're butting heads, they're really talking about heady stuff, about your obligation to people and what charities you support and things. It's just very heady stuff, and it's very heady philosophical stuff, and so that added to the intensity, and I really appreciated that, and I can't wait. I've still got a hold on book 5 in the Knitting in the City series, and I can't wait for it. And just in case you're not familiar with the Knitting in the City series, it is a knitting circle, but they rarely talk about any knitting. I mean, they may occasionally mention a hat they're making or a ball of yarn, but there is hardly any knitting in this book. It's not like Cozy Mysteries, where they'll put a knitting pattern in the back of the book and they're slamming you up upside the head with all of their knitting knowledge and dropping brand names and needle brands and stuff like that here and there. No, they barely mention the knitting. So non-knitters can read it and be fine. The next book that I read is an older book. It's about 90 years old, I believe. It's called The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery. It was written and published in 1926. It's part romance, part women's fiction, because the first half of the book is the heroine really kind of coming into her own and realizing that she wants to make a change in her life and everything. And then there's more romance toward the end. But the first half is really about her fixing her life. And for a book this old, the reason I'm reading it, I mean, I've read vintage pulp in the past, but the reason this came to my attention is because there's a lot of people. I've heard 5 reviews of this in the last month. Including one from the website Smart Bitches Trashy Books. For some reason, this is a book, and someone in my personal Facebook feed even, for some reason, this is a book that a lot of people have read and loved, and I've just never heard of it. And it's not like there's a new edition of it out or anything, but for some reason, everybody seems to be talking about it right now. I don't know why. But the heroine's name is Valancy. Her family calls her Doss because they don't like her name. They didn't ask her if she wants to be called Doss. They just call her Doss. She is 29 years old. The book opens on her 29th birthday, and she is miserable. She has always lived her life rather than cause any waves. I mean, as a child, she did things here and there as children do, but she pretty much learned as she got to be an adult that life would just be easier if she just did everything her mother told her to do and don't question it. Her, not just her mother, but she lives in a small town in Canada, and so there are all of the aunts and uncles and cousins and things live in the area, and they all gather for things, for birthdays and anniversaries and stuff. There's always dinners and things, and so like one of her uncles owns one of the local grocery stores, and so all of the family only shop. Their surname is Sterling. It just occurred to me what it was. And all the Sterlings shop at his store. All the Sterlings go to one doctor, all because they have appearances to keep up. They don't do this. They all go to the Anglican church, and they all do blah blah blah. And so she just has to follow through with whatever everyone tells her. So she gets, how they say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, her particular village has their input on everything that she does, even as an adult, so they tell her she shouldn't wear colorful clothes, she should wear her hair a certain way, she should blah blah blah, and she just does everything they tell her to. Well, she wakes up on her 29th birthday miserable, realizing this is my life. And they always give her a hard time for being a spinster, that she should have attracted a man by now, but of course she wouldn't attract a man because she's not pretty, not like her cousin Olive or whatever her name is. So, and she's been having chest pains. So rather than cause a fuss with her family because she doesn't want to hear their mouth, she sneaks off to the other doctor, not the doctor they normally go to, and he tells her that she has a year to live. So once she gets that news, she's like, you know what? All bets are off. I am tired of all of y'all. And she starts speaking up, wearing what she wants to wear, changing her hair, doing what she wants to do, because she's decided if she's going to die in a year, she wants to have lived before she dies. So that's pretty much the first half of the book, and then the romance comes in later. I don't want to spoil that for you because it is very readable. That was one of the things that I was surprised by. If you read my brief review that I posted on my blog, Average Gal Reads, or I posted the same thing on Goodreads, but I have always been surprised by, not surprised, that was the wrong word, I apologize. I've always avoided older books because anything like older than like 1950s, because I've always been afraid that it's going to be too vague, because there's certain things that you can't say back in the day, so they're not going to, like, if somebody had sex out of marriage with somebody else, they're not going to come out and say it plainly because that would have been shocking. So sometimes you have to work hard, a bit like reading Shakespeare. It's in English, but it's not quite the English that we speak or that is written today. So you have to work a little harder to get your brain to understand what he said. And I've always been afraid that because same thing with, I tried to read Persuasion earlier this year, and that took a lot of work. I eventually ended up abandoning it after about 3 chapters because it just took me a while to it was so wordy to get to the point. But this is not, the Blue Castle is not wordy. It's wordy in certain spots, and I'll get to that in a minute, but it wasn't wordy to the point where you didn't understand what Ellen Montgomery was trying to talk about. Which, did I mention the author was Ellen Montgomery? I'm sorry if I didn't. She's the same author who wrote Anne of Green Gables, which I have not read Anne of Green Gables. I have not seen the television show of Anne of Green Gables, probably because I grew up watching Little House on the Prairie, although I didn't read the Little House on the Prairie books either. But I grew up watching the television show, so I had no interest in Anne of Green Gables. But this book is just, it's plain spoken enough that if you're like me and ever had a fear of reading older books because you thought that the writing style would be too, like Jane Austen's too wordy for me, I can appreciate it if I listen to it in audio form, but trying to read it takes a while to wrap my brain around it. So if you're like me and thought that most books were like that, this book was not like that. The only wordiness, and it's not a fault against the book, it's just me. Like a lot of authors that I've read about in the 1920s, they like writing a lot about nature, and nature scenes for me are like sex scenes for other people, where other people are like, oh, another sex scene, boring, skip. That's how I am with nature scenes in books. It's like, oh yeah, okay, you're setting the mood. She likes nature, good. Let's get back to the talking. I'm not a nature person. I'm not an outdoorsy person. I don't camp. I don't, do anything outside, except the outside gets me from the inside of this building to the inside of another building. That's what the outside is for. So I don't need to read descriptions of authors rhapsodizing about the beauty of the trees and the birds and the water and the blah blah blah. But I appreciate that it did set a mood, it set a tone of how Valancy felt better in nature, how nature helped relieve the stress of her life and everything. So it was appreciated. I appreciated that it did what it was supposed to do. I just don't need pages and pages of it. And so that's every. Oh no, one more. Last book that I read, and it was a book I actually finished about an hour or so before recording this video, and it was called Under Her Skin by Adrian Anders. If I'm not mistaken, I do apologize. I took some notes, but apparently not enough notes because I decided at the last minute to make this video. This is what I would call a dark contemporary romance. I don't normally read the dark books. I know a lot of people really like the tortured souls thing, where somebody has been through something really awful, like their parents getting murdered in front of them or being kidnapped or something like that, and that has broken them to the point where they don't know if they can ever love again, type thing. And that this was one of those kind of books where the heroine Uma has been through a thing. I'm gonna be vague about it because my rule of thumb is if the blurb on Goodreads is vague, then I'll be vague. If the blurb on Goodreads has said something, then I will. You feel free to talk about that. So the blurb on this is kind of vague, so I'll be vague just in case you want to read it, because it was a pretty good book. I gave it 3 stars. I gave it 3 stars mainly because it was less depressing than I expected it to be. If I had to rate it during the first couple chapters, the book would have been 1 star because it would have been too depressing for a romance for me. But that stuff was there for a reason, to set the tone and or to set where Uma was coming from, so that when she gets lifted out of it, you can appreciate it more. So that's why it went up a couple stars as the book went along. But Uma has gone through something. She's on the run. She meets a guy. He's gone through some stuff himself, so he can automatically recognize that she's broken, and he's a little broken himself. Their little broken parts are attracted to each other, but they feel like they can't be together because her situation that she's running from isn't totally resolved. So there's pretty much that. And her situation is bad. It's not, anything light. Her situation is bad. And so the man she meets is Ivan, by the way. So Uma and Ivan, I like them together. Not embarrassed to say that this is one of the few books where I did not skim the sex scenes. Because each one of them was different and relevant to what the characters were going through. So I did not feel the need to skim them. They weren't just, plug A going into slot B, as some people like to say. But it does not pass the auntie test. Blue Castle definitely passes the auntie test. Run, hand that to your auntie. Your auntie would love it. Ninja at First Sight, I don't think your auntie would be interested in it just because it's college kids. It's like, what are these college kids doing? But Under Her Skin, as I said in my review on Goodreads, I don't think you can hand this to, or maybe I didn't say it on Goodreads, maybe I said it on my blog, but Under Her Skin, you're not handing this to your auntie unless maybe your auntie is a big fan of Criminal Minds. That's all I'll say about that. And it's getting close to time to wrap this up, so I just wanted to add in a few other thoughts. As far as my posting schedule, I'm trying to work in reading among my other things. This week I've actually gotten up earlier in the morning and managed to read a little bit before I handle other parts in the day. So I'm going to see if that continues to work for me, because next week I have 2 more classes starting, to bring my classes up to 4. I had 2 classes and then I had 2 late start classes, so they don't start till next week. Plus I'm starting a part-time job next week, so I may not have time to read it all, but we'll see. As I said, the more work I have on my plate, the more I manage to find time to read. So we'll see how that goes. And my other posting schedule with my blog, if you are watching this video or found this video on my blog, I wanted to mention that generally I would write a little thing for Goodreads and then try to write a whole more extensive review for my blog, Average Gal Reads, or sometimes not write anything for Goodreads and then just do it all on my blog and then link that to Goodreads or what have you. I've decided it's easier for me to do it the other way around, to just write the review on Goodreads and then link it to my blog, simply because Goodreads has, once you type the review, they have all the HTML that I can just plug into my blog, and that makes it easier, number one. And number two, I know that there's a lot of people like my BFF who don't use Goodreads, but she does occasionally read my blog. So I used to feel bad about putting the same thing on Goodreads and on my blog, but now I realize, after talking to more people and what have you, that there are people who don't do both. That you may be a reader, but you don't use Goodreads, you use something else. So it doesn't hurt for me to put the same review on both places. So I think that's what I'll do for now, rather than letting my blog sit fallow. And I don't want to not write my thoughts down at all, because I've looked back over some books that I've read in the past, where when I first started Goodreads, before I had a book blog, I used to write extensive reviews on Goodreads, and then I stopped for a while. And just this year I looked back at some of the things I said about books I read 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I'm like, why did I stop writing these thoughts down? I like looking back and remembering what I thought about a book. And I like having it there on Goodreads when I'm looking up other books. So I'm going to go back to posting on Goodreads and just paste it on. So just know that if you follow me in both places, the review is pretty much going to be the same in both places. I may add an extra line or two on my blog, but for the most part, it'll be pretty much the same in both places. Also, I wanted to say that I am thinking about doing Nonfiction November. Not that I'm going to participate in the Goodreads group for it or anything, but I just heard several booktubers mention Nonfiction November, and it sounded like a good idea, because I know that I do have several. I haven't looked at it recently, but I know that I have several nonfiction books on my Overdrive wish list and on my Goodreads TBR list. So November sounds like a good time. It's just another reason, just another thing to help me figure out what to read. Because right now I finished Under Her Dark Skin, and I'm like, I don't know what am I going to read. Do I go for something that's already on my wish list? Do I go for something on my Goodreads TBR? Do I, I'm kind of, after reading The Blue Castle, I'm a little attracted to more older books, and I have another book that I saw on Persephone Books called The Homemaker that I'm kind of interested in, that I saw that I can get through my library. So I also have a wish list on openlibrary.org of older books that I have not read yet. So there's so many places that I can pull books from, that having a challenge like Nonfiction November kind of helps center me as to at least, okay, what am I going to read next? Although, if I get a craving for a Christian historical romance, all bets are off, right? And last but not least, I want to give a shout out to Mel's Bookland Adventures. I will link the video I'm talking about down below. It's called 10 Reasons to Love Your Library. I don't think enough people on BookTube give shout outs to their library. I hear people mention in passing, I got this book from the library or whatever, but there's a lot of book hauls on BookTube. And there's not a lot of people like me who are, 100% library and proud of it. 98% library, but even the books that I don't get from my local public library, I get from Open Library, which is pretty much a loan, or I get from something like Project Gutenberg. So I don't buy books. I haven't bought books in a long time. I know, no shade on y'all who do buy books, but I'm here holding it down for the people who go to the library. And so I appreciate having somebody else on BookTube who also is holding it down for people who go to the library. So you should go watch her video, 10 Reasons to Love Your Library. So it has been 30 minutes, longer than I planned, but it has been a while since I recorded a video. So if I manage to record a video next week, then hopefully it'll be half this time. And those of you who also happen to watch my Saturday stitching videos, I may or may not do one tomorrow. It depends on how much stitching I get done tonight so that I have at least something to show you tomorrow. So thanks for showing up and listening to me if you've made it this far. And I hope you have a good weekend. Bye.